Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Colin McSweeney, Director of Public and International Affairs at Cork Chamber. So thank you for joining us to this introductory webinar to the Mission Cities Climate Hub in collaboration with Cork City Council. This is our second such event on the Capital Hub, and it's part of our wider work with the Council and other key stakeholders focusing on the sustainability agenda for Cork. Before I hand over to Paul and Alvar, just some housekeeping. Please ensure that your mics are off during the presentations. To be aware, this webinar is being recorded for our own records, and there will be the opportunity to for Q&A at the end, where you can unmute yourself to ask any question. I'd like now to hand over to Paul McGurk, Senior Strategy and Senior Strategic Policy and Development Officer for Cork City Council, to give a brief overview of the Mission Cities label and the Climate Hub. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Cathal, and thanks to yourselves and the Chamber's ongoing collaboration with us on this and other initiatives. I'll just briefly give the context of today before Alvar explains the Capital Hub in more detail. As some of you are, hopefully all of you are aware, Cork is part of an EU climate neutral and smart cities mission, one of 112 cities in the European Union who are looking to dramatically accelerate our journey to climate neutrality. And we've been working on that for quite a while, and it's the city as a whole, not just the city council. So we have 15 private, public and community organisations signed up to the mission, the Chamber being key to that as well as some other public body, all the relevant public bodies in the city and some national organisations as well. So basically, we submitted a number of documents late last year, which is part of what's called the Climate City Contract, which is the contract between the European Union, the national government and the city. So there's three parts to that. There's an investment plan, an action plan and a series of commitments. So we've had all commitments basically from all those public and private bodies to committing to dramatically accelerate to climate neutrality. And we're glad to say just a few weeks ago, we were awarded what's called the Mission Label. So that basically means you have a credible plan, overall plan. We still need to populate a lot of that with projects, but you've identified your impact pathways and how we're going to get there. So that's kind of embargoed until May. You'll hear more about that in May, but we're I suppose the first Irish city to get that, which my colleague Peter Med will be central to that documentation, and that'll be uploaded. All 300 pages of that documentation you can have, I'm sure, when that's done. So look, one of the key aspects of that is that it entitles us to access to the Capital Hub, which and some technical assistance, which Alvar will explain. So that's just the overall context of, I suppose, look, our climate neutrality, our aim towards climate neutrality is around it being easier to move around as a city, how we heat our buildings, just more comfortable homes, greener, better air quality, and so on. So that's the overall context. And I'll hand you back to Cathal now.
Thank you very much, Paul, for that. As Paul said, now it's for the technical part, and we're very lucky to have Alvar Giner here with us today. Alvar works with Bankers Without Borders, and he is Cork City's Mission Cities appointed advisor. So over to you, Alvar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cathal, and thank you for Paul for that, setting the scene. So indeed, a lot of work has gone into getting Cork, the council, and I think the wider ecosystem to this point. So what I'll try and explain quickly, and I'm more interested to kind of have a conversation and get your input and your reactions on this, is to cover what the Climate City Capital Hub is here to support Cork with, and particularly in the Irish context, where these sort of conversations and bringing in private sector, different agencies and public bodies is it's always very relevant and very much part of what the mission as a whole is aiming at, but even more so in an Irish context, I would say. and well, also trying to explain my role as city finance specialist, which is to be the main contact point on the ground for these sort of initiatives. Basically, this is, like Paul said, about moving from planning and pathways. There's considerable amount of work that has gone into that. So we have a very good map of what it is that, you know, in the next until 2030 and beyond, what are the areas to tackle, what are the ways to get to climate neutral scenario. It's for moving from that high level kind of detail to actual projects to make that happen. So, and one key lever in that regard is out of the mapping through the climate investment plans that we've done throughout Europe, the gap between what's available in terms of public funding for the actions that are in those plans versus what the ask is to make those projects come through to reality is about 650 billion euros. So essentially the lesson, and it's one that's been kind of validated throughout, is that it's probably impossible to get things going at the pace needed without heavily involving the private capital and the private sector as a whole. So on that background, the Capital Hub is the finance support arm that is aiming to kind of try and be that bridge, and by giving support to individual projects, and also on the other end of it, there's the project development, and on the other end of it, bringing that financing perspective early into the process. I guess another aspect that's worth mentioning here is that the climate investment plan, and indeed all of the actions and the framework for this whole exercise, and indeed for the Capital Hub as well, is that this is a citywide kind of effort. And so when throughout the presentation I mentioned the city, you know, supporting the city, I mean, I can explain later in more detail, but it really means supporting what's going on in the city, obviously under the guidance of the council team, but really trying to reach to every corner so that we kind of make things happen. So 3 key points about what Capital Hub is and does. First, it's transactional, so we're focused on projects or transactions, if you will, to facilitate those capital flows throughout their journey from inception, early product development, all the way through implementation. We're neutral, so the Capital Hub does not provide financing directly out of a balance sheet of our own or out of a specific kind of funding for this purpose from the EU or from other sources. We're there to make that connection with EU funds, indeed, with any other public funds, with the aim of, where possible, blending public and private finance, and just being transparent in terms of getting the best options there for cities and for other project sponsors. And the third item is that we're climate aligned, so the actions that we support do need to have a climate positive angle to them. Although, I mean, it's sort of increasingly obvious that for most capital investments probably taking place in Cork now in the next few years, there's a sort of climate angle to them, whether it be housing or energy or so. That it really touches across all policy areas imaginable. So in terms of how the support is divided up, there's probably so at the left we have the planning exercise that's been going through, which is really a strong starting point for trying to pick out the projects. And then we have the 2 basic arms of support. One is developing projects, so seeing what's there, what's missing to get things to the next stage, and then all the way through to financing. and on the other side, and we do that, I suppose, in a sectorial way. So there's expertise within the Capital Hub in mobility, in retrofit, in all these different areas that work on these project support. And at the other end, there's the Neutral Capital Center, which is the group of people in the Capital Hub that deal more directly with the bigger kind of with the financing needs, but also with looking at ways of bundling different projects or at combining them in different ways to structure them in a more capital optimal way. And to also kind of get that to real investors and interact and go to the avenues that are that exist to make those projects possible. So in a sort of a investment banker type of role with the lead of cities and other project sponsors. The city finance specialist is kind of, as I will go on to explain, the main contact person with on the ground. So I'm the city finance specialist appointed for Cork, also for Dublin, and for the cities in the UK and Belgium. So my role is to be there on the ground, working closely with the council team, but also with any other project sponsors in the city to get them to the right kind of expertise and support within the Capital Hub, and to help that organize into a sort of kind of project pathway, and also to adapt things and run it in the context of the individual city and the country, while also bringing the best practices or experiences in individual areas from other areas of Europe, which I guess is quite it's probably where the Capital Hub can be of more obvious sort of added value, having that visibility of different projects going on in Europe. The bottom line is most of these things have been done in some way or form in somewhere else. So whether it's really a privately led project or a publicly led one, and so it's about seeing how it's been done and then thinking through and adapting it to the Irish context and making it work. So that's the city finance specialist on the ground, together with the city advisor, which is the larger kind of support contact person within net zero cities, but less to deal with the more general kind of support. And then the link that the city finance specialist does with these projects goes either through the technical assistance funnel or the Neutral Capital Center. So in the technical assistance, again, we look at individual projects and see how we can support with project development. I'll try and break that down a bit further in a minute. We also kind of connect where we don't have the exact expertise with other areas for getting technical assistance. EIB is one, but there's many others. And in the Neutral Capital Center, we'll look at more mature projects and get them to financing, and actually do the reach out to investors, the structuring, etc. I will also try and break it down a little bit further in a second. Then we have the data analytics part, which is, well, it's a lot about knowledge sharing at this point rather than being purely quantitatively, but it's something that's being built into the system so that, I mean, at a minimum right now, there's projects in every area that can be used to benchmark, what the next steps might be for a particular project that you're involved with. And yeah, sort of also in terms of the returns on more quantitative aspect, we have some benchmark which is important to kind of see how to tackle each project. Okay, so this is just the internal way of slicing things up, but hopefully it gives you an idea of, if you have a project that you're thinking of, how we divide it up and what support kind of means in practice. So starting either from the investment plans or just a project anew. I mean, the investment plans really are mapping out lots of areas, so there's no risk that your project, if it's climate positive, is not included in and accounted for in one of those. From whatever is there before we get involved, the very earlier stage type of projects would be at the stage of product definition, technical design. So here we'll have an idea about a project, maybe a concept note, some technical and financial feasibility studies. The support that we give here is helping complete those feasibility studies where possible. Maybe fine tune the concept note and start kind of getting to a final business plan more in the conceptual sense. I guess it's worth saying here that there's a few things that we don't do. So we don't provide legal advice for regulatory and other reasons, even in this area, but kind of throughout the funnel. And second, we don't provide feasibility studies in the sense of engineering kind of work. So when a project needs that kind of feasibility studies, we will try and find an alternative route so that it can be funded if the city is not able to fund it at this point, or the private sponsor. And there's a special facility for potentially doing that, which I will discuss later, which is basically a way to hire external consultant to do some of the work that the Capital Hub is not equipped to do, such as in this case. But well, I'll mention that later. I suppose in the grand scheme of things that it has a relatively limited scope. But if it's relevant, it's definitely something that can be used for the project. So that's the first layer. Then when we have a business case, the necessary technical and feasibility studies, we move to the economic and financial modeling. So this is all about getting the project documentation ready with a view that it can be financed, and with a kind of benchmark of, well, just private lenders, investors in the particular kind of domain. So if we're talking about an EV charging project, it will be adapted to the marketability. It will be a model that's marketable and it's actually useful to engage with either the operators or the funder, the lenders, or the private equity investors, etc. Then on the financial structuring stage, we start mapping out who could finance the project and evaluate ways of structuring the different sources of funding. And then the last step is to actually reach out to investors, get their feedback, and switch things to complete the transaction. So this might include things like pitch materials for investors, or well, anything you would need to, for example, to have for an institutional investor to be able to invest, for example, in a project. And then that's the closing of the project. This is just a quick chart to convey that you see me here today as the face of the Capital Hub, but there's actually a lot of expertise that's organized and divided up into different groups. So yeah, I will make the link, but there's a lot of expertise being accumulated in the different areas. That's really the people who are going to deliver the work and make sure that that it really helps move projects forward and fill in the gaps where otherwise those projects might not move forward. And this is just a quick snapshot of all the different partners that are involved, and you see different sort of expertise. Bankers Without Boundaries, with the entity that employs me, is more on the finance side of things, but there's also policy experts, and there's a fair bit of obviously energy expertise, in engineering, transport, with different special skills. So these are some examples of this kind of support that the Capital Hub has been delivering in terms of the technical assistance. I have a few examples, so maybe I'll run through the next slides. And this is just to give you a taster of the sort of things that we are supporting. Usually these are led by cities, but there is no reason why. I mean, for some of these it will be slightly different, but why, changing whatever needs to be changed. We cannot take up private projects or if they have this same kind of climate angle. So one such example is this city in Iberia, which I think is Valencia, that is using basically the municipal buildings to install solar panels. There's some electricity sharing that's being set up with an energy community bent on the back of this, but basically using the revenues both in terms of savings for the council and other public entities in the city, as well as the electricity that's being sold to residents in the area to cut down on utility bills and generate income from those savings. So there's a debt, this different kind of there's a debt portfolio that's been built at the back of that so that it doesn't cost the city anything to roll this out. I'm laying it in some kind of detail in a rather silly way, but just really to make it tangible what it is that in practice, we do. So in this case, the city had some plans. Perhaps they were going to invest more heavily into it, and then basically, I guess the play is often that if we add an element of private finance, it can be multiply the impact, and then the city can do more with less. But the same would be true of a private company. There we would look to actually bring in maybe something slightly different, but let's see that would actually be kind of differential in terms of the fundability. But for example, moving on to transport, we have Klagenfurt, which is doing fleet update, basically electrifying these 45 buses. Here, and this is a bit more comparable for private companies potentially, the idea is how do you structure the different pieces with a bit of asset finance, so leasing the batteries, for example, so that you have different tranches of debt, and basically the savings from running the lower operating costs for the system can repay the debt to make the change. So this is a type of transaction that we've looked at quite a bit, electrifying a fleet, and we can, for a private company, for example, help do that as well, or at least have a way to benchmark what is done at a bigger kind of public transport scale. Then we have examples of retrofit, and I'm trying to cover the different areas with these examples. So Scandinavian city that's going to retrofit public buildings through an EPC or ESCO type contract where the electricity savings will pay for the debt that's being put on the back of the project. We can discuss a little bit more about these sort of schemes, but obviously the aim here is very much to bring the private sector in, and we're working on some early projects in this regard with Cork, but maybe I don't want to jump the gun on this, but we can certainly discuss what the aim is there. But we also do adaptation projects where these are a bit more difficult to fund, but it's about adapting cities to projected to climate change. And so, for example, there's an environmental restoration in this river in Valladolid that we found some kind of alternative funding streams for. I think we can also discuss other templates more for the portfolio side of things, but basically, I guess the general idea is here that we can look at bundling different projects in ways that make sense and make them more kind of lighter to carry. This is particularly relevant in the case of privately sponsored projects, but I can maybe give some more examples later on. One last point that I think might be relevant for the people here today is the support that I covered is kind of the Capital Hub direct support. We have other types of support within the Net Zero Cities, and one of them is the City Expert Support Facility. So, like I explained before, where the Capital Hub does not have the exact expertise because it's very kind of specific, or it's a type of expertise that an engineering company or a consultant would have. There is this facility at the Net Zero Cities level to get funding basically for those sort of feasibility studies or other types of work in that domain. So it could be for a retrofit project, the work that needs to be done. Once there are a few pieces in place, the work that needs to be done to kind of get that to the next step can be supported through a CSF request. This is, to give an idea, I think these type of contracts are actually tendered out by Net Zero Cities. So on a competition basis, whenever it's, I think, more than 30,000 euros, and that gives you an idea of the amounts. They're not excessive amounts at all. So they are kind of very targeted tasks and requests. But certainly there's an emphasis or potential for working with the relevant partners, which will often be local partners. So it's definitely been the case that the city has been kind of working with a consultant or an expert, and then they retake that through a CSF to keep working on that project and bring it to the next level. And with that, I will open it up to questions. I guess, yes, I'll open it up to questions.
Thank you, Alvar. Thank you very much for that presentation. It's really such an important initiative. And with 650 billion needed to finance all the climate investment plans, I think every support and funding option is crucial. Just a reminder, if anyone does have a question, please unmute yourself and you can ask, or alternatively, sorry, my video is off, or alternatively, put it into the chat and we can pick it up from there. But let's get a question hub projects.
Oh, I think you broke up a little bit there, but the question is about?
It's sorry, apologies for that. I was wondering, is there a minimum ticket size for the Capital Hub projects?
So, not particularly. To give some idea, I guess the bigger, the better, to the extent that it has more impact. But the projects that are between 1 million and 10 million, we're already working on those projects. I guess in terms of eligibility more widely, what we're looking for are projects that either directly imply or unlock capital investment and have a climate positive angle or impact to them. If a project, in many cases, there will be a smaller kind of bit or project that can then be scaled up. So that's why there's no hard requirement on on size. We have some sort of preference for bigger size tickets, but if a company has a project that's smaller, we will certainly look at it because it could be a kind of template or pilot to then scale that up across the board. I mean, that's very much the idea.
So no minimum size, but maybe bigger the better, and more impact, basically. Okay, cool. Still waiting on a question from the chat. If anybody does have a question, please feel free to jump in. Or else
Eamon,
I can keep going.
There's a question from Eamon
you
there.
have a hand raised. Yeah.
Hi, Alvar. Thanks very much for the presentation. It's very informative. You just talked about the investment or private investment, and is there any expectation of a return on investment from those investors, or any indication of the interest rate that they'd expect on those investments?
So yes, I think it will vary very widely depending on the project. So it's quite difficult to give a head figure. I guess with many of these projects, the play and the thing that the Capital Hub is particularly positioned to do is to make sure that we're blending, trying to go back to that we're blending kind of the public funding that's available with the funding that the investment that any private investor would put in. And so from that perspective, we can tackle projects that are not, that otherwise wouldn't be funded. So it's worth exploring that in most cases because there's, for example, I mean, for retrofit, there's considerable support that can be utilized if we only kind of get our heads around a project and can really optimize for that blended finance approach. But if you have questions on specific kind of projects or areas, I'm very happy to. I mean, indeed, that's probably the more useful way to,
Of course,
see if something is within the realms of being funded competitively by people that the Capital Hub can connect you with.
Great, thank you.
And we've a question from Michael in the chat. In terms of feasibility studies, can you expand on this area and what criteria apply?
So when I say feasibility studies, it's really the non-engineering kind of putting information together that's already there to present it, to make it presentable to investors, to lenders, the sort of thing that investment bankers would do. Usually we don't have the capability, even though this is, sometimes quite useful for cities or other project sponsors to do too much by way of really bootstrapping the projects ourselves in terms of feasibility studies. And the thing that is explicitly kind of not included is the engineering bits. There's not a, maybe Paul can help here.
Yeah, I just, as an example, I suppose, Alvar's been super helpful. We've been trying to work through, it's early days, as Alvar said, on a few things, but we had a meeting between Alvar and our social housing retrofit team yesterday. Council has about 11,500 social housing. Some are over 100 years old, and how can the cost of retrofitting those? So we're early days trying to maybe develop a feasibility study of how we can get some commercial return for investors on that, combined with grant aid nationally. So that's kind of the feed, but it's, as Alvar said, it's up to us to kind of come in with some of the technical aspects in terms of energy bills and what would be involved in bar ratings and so on. But that's kind of what we're exploring. This is really new ground for not just the city council, but for the city and probably the country, really, I suppose, on this kind of stuff. So that's kind of an example. There's another one around commercial housing retrofit, commercial buildings. I suppose one of the aspects we'd hope maybe can come from some of this conversation is 22% of the emissions, greenhouse gas emissions from the city are from commercial buildings. Commercial sector, primarily buildings, because most of the industry is outside the city. So can we use the hub to kind of accelerate that in terms at scale as opposed to individual buildings? How we do that now, I suppose that's part of the feasibility we're trying to hopefully explore with Alvar. That's just an example. And yeah, and for example, the EPC outside the hub, we are working on an EPC with one of our leisure centres. The council has approximately 80 buildings. 5 of them are responsible for 75% of the emissions. So we're trying to work through that process as well.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Maybe to address some of the questions in the chat. So Kevin's first questions, the project to match EIB funding, I think it can come from either privately funded or from another public source, indeed. If that's the question, so the sort of the EIB kind of requirements, because they usually require co-financing 50% or usually 50% of the whole investment. If that's the question, in general, we support projects from, even if they're 100% publicly funded or 100% privately funded, there's no restriction there. As I said, it will make sense to usually try and blend those two approaches in some way or form. But at the investment level, it could be that it's just a project that's 100% kind of privately funded, and you just get the grants and the other sources or the subsidies, for example, but it's totally private led. And we can also support with projects that are 100% publicly funded, where there's a piece of technical kind of assistance that's particularly relevant, or where even if the funding is accounted for. I mean, although we will try in that scenario, I mean, there's usually gains to be had from involving a layer of private financing, where it's one of these kind of relatively, kind of already rolled out systems like with energy savings companies, ESCOs, or that sort of thing, where it will just save the public sector money essentially. Does that answer the question, Kevin? I will. Okay, if not, do come in.
Apologies, I couldn't find the audio button. Yeah, it does. Thank you very much.
Okay. Specific target? No, so there's no direct link between how much impact the project has and how much we can invest in it, because the investment, it's a kind of a finance first approach, has to work so that it's funded. I guess, I mean, we do prioritize the actions that have more impact, but it's equally true that some areas might actually be kind of more difficult, more expensive in terms of investment per, CO2 kind of euros per CO2 reduction achieved, but we still sort of go ahead even if there are less capital efficient kind of investments from that point of view in terms of emissions reductions. So there's no particular link. We do want to work on the most impactful kind of projects where that's possible. So we are kind of mandated to support Cork City, who are the signatories for the Climate City Contract and the commitments in this endeavor. But where there is a bigger project that has a link with Cork City, we're very happy to look at it and support. I guess would be the general answer. If it's completely outside of the city limits, then well, it's still, we will be, but I imagine that it would be relatively kind of easy to find that link.
Correct. Yeah, that's understandable, I think. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. If there's no further questions, maybe I can talk briefly about sort of what the approach to projects might be, if these are sponsored or the projects that you have. But basically, the way to get it started is to reach out to me as City Finance Specialist. I'm very happy to kind of have an informal conversation, even if it's not with kind of the whole prepare a project just to kind of get a sense of whether this is something that could get capital support and whether that could be useful for you or for clients you have or companies that you work for. And from then on, the only requirement to working with projects that are not kind of more directly led by the council is that that they will acknowledge, we will give them visibility on what's going on, and they will acknowledge and kind of approve that the support that the city has from Net Zero Cities be directed to those projects. But there's no limit to the amount of projects that we can kickstart. And indeed, at this kind of early stage, we want to get our hands on as many projects as possible. So I would encourage any projects, whether more early or also the ones that are kind of almost ready to finance, to send them through if you want. Sometimes it's just having someone have a second look at something that you've been working on for a long time. That's also kind of one way that might be useful, and then we see where to go from there.
Just to say, we found Alvar, I'm not just saying it because he's here, but he's been super accessible and flexible for us. We've a lot of the stuff we're putting forward is just pure ideas, and we're just trying to tease it out. So, and we're happy. Look, if people want to come back to Alvar directly or to the chamber team or to ourselves, we're happy to have a conversation, because that old BT ad, it's good to talk. So, a lot of stuff needs to be teased out. So, just to say that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just on that, I suppose if you do have any questions or you want more information or get in contact with, I suppose, Paul or Alvar, you are more than welcome to go through me or my colleague Elisa, who's also on the call. So I will just be cathal@corkchamber.ie. And you may have got the invite from myself or Elisa anyway. So our emails will be somewhere. We can follow up afterwards anyway. So yeah, this Mission Cities is such an important award for Cork City and County, and Cork Chamber will continue to support the City Council on the sustainability agenda. But I think it's important for businesses and other stakeholders to think about how they can really utilise this opportunity, and the Mission City label itself and the Capital Hub is just one of these initiatives. So I'd just like to thank Alvar for joining us again today. This is the second time working with the Chamber on one of these, so I really appreciate it. And to Paul as well. Paul, I just wonder if you just any final message or next steps when it comes to the Mission Cities and Capital Hub.
Yeah, no, listen, just again, thank everybody for taking the time out to attend. Thanks for the Chamber for arranging and the ongoing collaboration, as we say. Look, you'll probably hear more about the label later in May, I would say, but whether it's around the hub or in general around the mission, we're happy to have a conversation. This is I suppose we keep saying it's a movement we're trying to create. It's a whole society approach to this. In terms of investment, we've estimated that the investment needed is about 14.5 billion for the city. About 4 billion that is public sector, so the rest is commercial or the citizen. But whether it's this or other projects, we're happy to have a conversation and look at how we can work together. We've worked through the Chamber and other entities on various initiatives, so we're happy to have that conversation. And no, just again, thank you again.
Thanks very much, Paul. Just a final thank you to Alicia, Vicky, and Sharon from the Chamber for helping to pull this together. So yeah, if you do have any questions or follow up, myself and Alicia's email are in the chat there. So thank you all, and have a great weekend.